Hi, I'm Phil, and I'd like to talk with you about understanding feedback. How can we make sense of the feedback that we get? You might have seen stuff like this, comments like, you touch on interesting ideas, but they're not fully developed, or try to show more critical engagement with the literature. And you might have thought to yourself, well, yeah, I understand what all those words mean, but understanding what it means for me, for my work, how do I make sense of that? I'd like to talk with you about some strategies that you can use. So the first one is stop and think. I've got a few thoughts here. Firstly, do take a moment to think before you act. We get feedback, we have an emotional response, and I talk elsewhere about that. But we also want to have a bit of a thinking response. We want to think about the comments we get. And to do that, we might want to process them a bit. We might want to underline some things, highlight some things, circle things, brainstorm, go into some different environment perhaps where we think better, get a printout of it and work with that, whatever it is that helps you stop and think really analytically rather than reacting in the moment. And finally, ask yourself questions. What does this feedback mean for me? Where could I apply this to in my work? What might someone else think about this feedback? Something I always try to do when I get feedback comments is I look at the criteria, what I'm being assessed in. In the university context, this often means things like, assessment rubric might be a great articulation of the criteria. But it's not just universities where we have criteria. We have criteria and standards for quality work in all sorts of different places, be they safety standards, industry standards, funding criteria, criteria for a tender you're applying for, all sorts of things. So try and think, is there anywhere I can compare the feedback I've gotten to some sort of standards and try and say, oh, okay, so when they've said this thing I didn't quite understand, maybe it's relating to this particular criterion that I'm being evaluated against. You got to try and cross-check feedback as well. If we took on every piece of feedback we ever received from everywhere in the world as if it was equally valuable and we have to hold it all in our brains and do all of it, we'd be walking contradictions. So you want to ask yourself, is this feedback consistent with what other people have told me in the past? Perhaps I'm being told the same thing over and over again. That's often a really good sign that change is needed. You might find in a place like university that you have 10 different people telling you the same message in different language. That's probably an indication that it's a really important thing to fix. If one person ever in your life tells you something, maybe it's less important. But we would make that sort of judgment with respect to how credible the source is. There are some sources that are just more credible than others. If a random person on the street tells me my academic writing is not up to scratch, well, I'm probably not going to trust them as a random person on the street. If a respected researcher in my field tells me I need to lift my game with my research writing, I'm probably going to view them as more credible. You might think about clarifying with someone else. In some contexts, you can ask the feedback provider. Not all contexts. I often get anonymous peer review comments from other researchers. I don't know who they are. I can't reach out and talk to them. So I will often ask a friend, a peer, not so much my parents these days, or a colleague to say, hey, what do you think about this? Is there a way that we could talk this through? And I also offer to do that for other people. So engage in a sort of feedback sharing network where we'll talk through these things. There's often a challenging thing where students get comments from teachers and the teacher isn't always available to clarify it with them. So it's important to have a network around you that you can do this kind of feedback sense checking. And finally, I want to leave you with this thought that even wrong feedback is still kind of right. In my head, I have this phrase. And I'm going to sound like a total egomaniac here, but it works for me. They are wrong. They've given me some feedback comment that I think is totally wrong. I am smart, of course. They are not. Well, they might be. But this is one way someone could interpret my work. Every time I get some comment and gosh, the person might be so wrong about their feedback, I might have been researching this field for 20 years, and they might give me a comment that I know is categorically wrong, but it's a piece of information that tells me this is one way someone could interpret my work. So even the wrongest of feedback, and we can know it's wrong, can still be useful to us because I will reframe how I present something in the future based on all the ways that people have misinterpreted me in the past. Thanks so much for watching.